you have one salesperson doing everything. If they're not meeting their number, it's really hard to figure out what's going wrong. But when you can look at the prospecting on its own and the closing on its own and the success on its own and the leads on their own, you can very easily spot what's working and what's not in there, because you're sort of breaking apart all these little operational pieces. You don't have a hairball anymore.
I want to welcome you to my sales podcast, where we have one focus and one focus only. That is helping you, the sales community, and sales leaders create more conversations with more qualified buyers, ultimately leading to improving your sales productivity and closing more deals. Each show, you will hear from sales leaders, practitioners, and influencers to help you find, engage, and connect with more buyers. I'm Mario Martinez Jr., and you're now listening to the Selling with Social Sales Podcast. This episode is brought to you by Subtitle, a new online tool that makes it easy to automatically add captions to any video in minutes. Don't let your videos get passed over on social media because people can't follow along while on mute. Head to Subtitle, ZUBTITLE.com/Vengreso, VENGRESO to get started. My man, Aaron Ross. Welcome to Selling with Social, my friend. I'm super pumped that you're here with me today. For those of you who don't know my friend, Aaron Ross, well, he's the man, the myth, and the legend. No joke about that. He's also the CEO of Predictable Revenue, Inc., and the author, best-selling author, if I'm not mistaken, of the book Predictable Revenue. And then, of course, if you haven't seen him, you probably have heard about him as a keynote speaker. But I'm excited to have you here with me, my friend. Thank you for joining me here today on Selling with Social.
Yeah, happy to be here, Mario. I'm impressed by your beach background there. Which,
for those of you can't see, for those of you that can't see, it's the beautiful Miami beach right behind me that I've got going on, and there's no wind whatsoever, Aaron. No wind.
Yeah. Wait, green screen?
We got a little bit of a green screen going on right
there.
They're
getting better. They're getting better. I'm all job. Okay. Yeah.
If only they moved. So do me a favor, give us a little background. We've got sales leaders, we've got salespeople, we've got marketing leaders, business owners listening in, and you're quite legendary, and I'm excited to have you here to give some great advice on sales, sales development, and some good topics we're talking about related to SDR and sales leadership mistakes. But do us a favor, I introduced you, give us a little background about yourself and who you are.
Yeah, sure. Well, you know how when you're a kid and you dream of growing up to be like a pilot or an astronaut?
Yeah.
That's pretty much what I dreamed about. So I had no clue I would ever end up in sales or like how to help companies grow faster. That's like the last thing in the world. I didn't even know what that was until my mid-20s. Well, actually, when I was 27, 28, and I had a business that failed. And that was generally around the time I started understanding what like sales and revenue was about. Funny how failure will teach you those kinds of lessons. So now it's been to me strange often that I've written Predictable Revenue as a book called The Sales Bible of Silicon Valley. And there's a book after that called From Impossible to Inevitable with a guy named Jason Lemkin, a growth Bible. After losing, it was like $5 million of investors' money back then. Over now, been a lot of years, and working at Salesforce.com, really kind of learned over time there's these systems and templates and predictable ways that companies can make money and grow money. And I've done my best to put those into books and help teach people how growing sales, like getting off the ground and growing sales isn't, like a mystery. It's not really luck. Yeah, there's no silver bullet, but there's a lot of repeatable, proven systems you can do to create sales growth and do it in a predictable way. So that's what I'm always interested in, like the things, those patterns in companies, the hyper growth companies, the fast growing companies, what works for them, but what can be used and be made practical to companies of any size, whether it's a few 100,000, a few million, a few tens of millions, or bigger.
Yeah, love it. Now, I do want to understand a little bit about your Salesforce background, but before I ask you that question, do me a favor, tell our audience something about you, something that nobody would know by looking at your social profiles. And we can't talk about your 9 kids, which we will later on in the program.
Yeah, exactly. People are like, "What the hell?" And we're looking for a 10th. We're looking for a 10th kid right now to adopt. But I don't update my social enough. But what is not on there, I've gotten into 2 things a lot the last couple of months. Now that our youngest baby is like 2 years old, but one is guitar, and I've learned I can't play very well, but I can play pretty much the entire Ozzy Osbourne, Black Sabbath song "Crazy Train." Not well, but at least I can do all the pieces. And that I'm 47. I'm starting late, better late than never. And the other is axe and knife throwing. I set some tree stumps in the back, and my kids and I, it's just fun throwing axes. It's like axe and knife throwing. It's another side hobby.
Yeah, I think it was Dan Walshmit. I don't know if you know who Dan Walshmit is, but
yeah,
he actually did a retreat. He was with a company, and they were doing the axe throwing. He was actually recently on our podcast as well, and they were doing the axe throwing. And I saw that for the first time, and I thought, God, that must be so much fun.
It is, yeah, and the knives. I mean, if I flip my computer around and show you, I can see out the window, but it's really fun. We did it in Scotland the first time, but I guess it's a thing. It's a growing hatchet and axe. There's like an axe throwing league, and it's a thing now. Who knew?
Who knew?
And it's really fun. Yeah.
Who would have ever known? Sometimes I hear about
Probably
that.
Won't work, but
there it is, right there. For those of you
that
we're looking out Aaron's backyard there, and he definitely has these target boards right there. I love it.
So yeah, it was fun.
Fantastic. So do me a favor, talk a little bit about your Salesforce experience. What were you doing over at Salesforce? And by the way, I totally understand what you mean about not knowing that you were going to end up in sales, especially because I actually used to be a photo finisher for a camera. You may have, I don't even know if you know the company name, but it's long gone, Ritz Camera Centers. And that's where I started out at. And then someone put me into sales, right? And I was placed into sales as a result of doing selling that I didn't even know I was doing very well as a photo finisher. So totally get that. And I know you ended up over at Salesforce. Tell me what you did over there.
Actually, the reason I went there is because I had a company that failed. It was $5 million that we raised. And I think, though, the really important lesson, again, there's some business owners listening, is that if I was CEO and I abdicated my understanding of sales, like hired a VP of sales and kind of just let them do it, and I abdicated my understanding, I didn't get in to understand it and then delegate. You can't be afraid of sales. Oh, there's that thing, go sell. The leaders of a company have to be involved in sales, understand it in order to know how to make it work and to grow it. That's step one. I was like, okay, how am I going to learn sales? If I'm going to start another company again, I need to know how to sell, how to build a sales team, how to sell professionally. The only way to really learn is to sell. To start a business, you can't read about it. You got to start a business. That's how you learn. So to sell, to learn how to do it, you sell. And to me, I got a job at Salesforce.com, a sales role. The only job they had was the most junior one answering the 800 line, but it was a starting point. And I didn't have an ego. I just wanted to learn. So I ended up seeing the problem. Salesforce was $25 billion back then. Now they're like 13 billion, which is crazy. And their problem was they're struggling to go up market. They were spending lots of money to go after bigger companies, didn't have the leads. So I got permission to spend 3 months to figure out never done outbound prospecting. Really, I'd done door-to-door sales, painting company and such in college, but never software sales. So, all right, spent 3 months, able to figure out a very predictable, repeatable way to get appointments from companies that didn't know us.
Right.
And it's before people knew who we were. And that helped almost double how fast Salesforce could grow in sort of medium and enterprise markets. That was more than 10 years ago, 15 years ago.
Yeah.
When Salesforce was still relatively small, but growing fast.
Now just a small player in the sales tech space.
yeah, you know. And I learned a lot there. And when I left, and for a little over 12 years, I've been doing sales consulting of different kinds, helping companies build outbound prospecting programs and specialized sales teams. And it was really out and working with different teams, really learned what Salesforce did well. Because when other companies didn't do it, you could see the contrast.
Yeah.
So that's really where, too, this emphasis on outbound prospecting and how much of a growth driver, like how predictable it can be to grow your company, came into place. I saw other companies not doing it and not embracing it wholeheartedly like Salesforce did. The outbound program created, by now it's over, I'm sure, like $1 billion, but it was a huge, like half of the biggest deals every month that Salesforce closed came from outbound prospecting. Half of the top 10 biggest deals.
Wow.
And so, again, left Salesforce, I see companies like, oh, we're going to do outbound. No one does outbound. We want people to come to us. We're going to create great content and they're just going to come to us and we're going to pick up the phone, which honestly sometimes works. But started beating the outbound drum because I just saw it work and work incredibly well for the right companies, not for every company.
Yeah, for sure. So when you think about your role as a sales leader at Salesforce and combine that with the role of CEO, both now and the CEO roles that you had in the past, especially with a company that you said didn't do so well, and that's why you went over to Salesforce. What do you think are some of the common mistakes that CEOs make and sales leaders make?
Let's start with the sales leaders because they're actually different.
Okay.
Like entrepreneurs and CEOs. So sales leaders, sales executives, really common mistake. If you are at a company where you have more than a few salespeople, there's two really common mistakes. Let's say you've got more than a handful of salespeople. You might have 50, you might have 5, 10, 500. So most common one is the salespeople are all generalists. They need to do their own prospecting. They need to close their own deals. They might have to manage some accounts. Maybe give them some leads to follow up on. Huge mistake. They're really doing a lot of things, juggling too many jobs, wearing too many hats, and they're doing them all maybe well, maybe not. So the number one biggest opportunity, number one most important step that I've seen that people have read the book and they're like, oh, thank you. We did your practices. We doubled our company. Is specialize your sales teams. Make sure that you have prospectors who prospect. That's all they do versus separate from the closers who close, separate from the different teams that manage customers who signed up, which could include customer success, account management, professional services. And again, separate from an inbound lead response role if you have inbound leads. The metaphor I use is, can you imagine a soccer team where the coach said, all right, everybody score and everybody defend? It would be insane. But we do that in sales. So then let's say that you're already doing that. You've got some, they call it SDRs, inbound sales development reps, the junior ones. And so you've got some. Common mistake there. You either have the SDRs, the junior reps, come mixing inbound and outbound. So they're doing prospecting and they're responding to leads coming to the website. Huge mistake. Or maybe you separate those roles as you should, have prospectors who prospect and inbound lead responders who outbound funnel, inbound funnel are completely different. Assuming you get inbound leads. But maybe in your executive dashboards and metrics, you combine those two roles into some, you lump them in the same reports. I'll give you a simple example. A company would have a call report and 5 of the people in the calls are outbound prospectors who are calling and 3 of the people in the report are inbound. They're not apples to apples. They're making calls, but the inbound type calls are just the expectations and the metrics and the results are different than outbound calls. So you got to keep them completely separate. That's number one. The process and the metrics have to be completely separate for the outbound prospecting and inbound lead response.
Sounds like you advocate then for a specialty, and we're not talking about specialty as in a vertical specialty. We're talking about roles and responsibilities. Like you gave the example on soccer, football, basketball, whatever. Well, on the basketball, probably not the case, but on football, it's very rare that you're going to have someone on an offense as well as on defense, right? Could it happen? Sure, absolutely, but it's not that common. So what you're advocating though for, and what you're thinking that sales leaders, one common mistake that sales leaders make, and we'll get to CEOs in just a second, is to create a focus. You're a hunter or you're a farmer. You're in either inbound or you're an outbound. So either you're taking inbound leads and you're dealing with those, or you're going out and you're doing prospecting on the outbound side. You're either a relationship manager. I call that sometimes farmers, sometimes alluded to as farmers, or account managers, or could be even a customer success manager. More and more, I'm seeing organizations move those CSM roles into more of the sales function in terms of account management. So either you're relationship management or you're out there and you're establishing new business. Is that what I hear you saying that sales leaders need to be thinking about?
Yes. Whatever the set of jobs are that need to be done, people need to be able to do fewer things better. whatever those things are, because there's no one single way you divide and conquer. They need to be doing fewer things better.
Yeah.
And I'll give you an example. I'll have people say, well, I want my salesperson to be creating the relationship from the beginning. I don't want some junior person handing it off and then you got to restart the relationship. And right, I get that, but the fantasy is that, oh, my salespeople are doing a great job maintaining relationships with all their new leads and all their prospects and all their customers, which is completely false. Really, they're giving great service to some people they're trying to close that month and maybe a handful of others, and everyone else they're ignoring. That's the reality. But when you specialize, like a sports team, and you have the prospectors with a simple and clear handoff process to the closer, simple, clear handoff to the customer success or relationship management. Same thing with inbound, right? They have these handoff processes, which can be very simple and effective. What that means is service will get much better across everything you're doing, because at every step of the prospect or customer's buying cycle, they have someone there who's dedicated to them to make sure they get what they need quickly. Whether they're an inbound lead, an outbound prospect, they're signing, or they're a customer, rather than sometimes getting great service and a lot of times getting ignored, honestly.
Yeah. I cannot disagree with your thought concept on how sales organizations should specialize. And I do see the extreme value in inbound versus outbound. I also see the extreme value in having a hunter versus a farmer role. Let's face it, not every single sales rep is a hunter, and not every single salesperson wants to be a farmer, right? So there's even specialties within that. The one challenge, though, that, again, coming from 21 years of sales experience, my last stop as a VP of sales, and how I've looked at the world of sales leadership and sales teams, the one big challenge that I've always had in this model of you sell it, we hand it over, somebody else is maintaining the relationship, is that you lose continuity in the relationship that was, well, someone bought likely because they trusted in what you were saying and what you were selling, and you lose some of that continuity. And so I've always struggled with that when handing that relationship over. And so my hybrid to that is the seller will always be the seller, but you have to have a strong enough customer success manager that can really straddle the world of project management and understand sales opportunities to be able to speak to them and then engage the salesperson where that's necessary. To me, that customer success role, in my opinion, is becoming much more important and more powerful of a role in terms of helping with the relationship, but you still want to maintain that salesperson relationship, because oftentimes what I found is those salespeople, especially the larger the size of the deal you go, those salespeople and that relationship that they built throughout the sales process is extremely important to the success of both implementation and long-term happiness of a customer. What do you think about that?
Yeah, definitely agree. And you said the bigger the customers are, the more important that is. The easier it is for a salesperson to stay involved in some way. Like if I'm a true enterprise salesperson, I've got 5 customers. I'm trying to close 2 a year, maybe. It's a lot easier to stay in touch. Versus if I'm mid-market or maybe just got small business, I'm selling 30 customers a month, and that's impossible. The idea is you're taking the idea, how do you apply it to your business? And the thing is, what kills salespeople is having to do too many things.
Yeah.
Prospecting and closing. And I mean, even in the predictable revenue book, one of the chapters said salespeople shouldn't prospect. So it's a little bit of a dramatic statement, but really it means that salespeople shouldn't be making a lot of cold calls and cold emails and cold this and that, the other. When salespeople, the closers, prospect, some of the most expensive people on your sales team, you don't want making, a bunch of cold calls. You want them focused on a handful of key accounts or targets, whether it's like a few strategic partners, 10 or 5 or 10 or 20 specific accounts. That's where they should be prospecting, where they have relationships or can develop them, a small number, and have a junior person who could do all the mass prospecting in concert with them.
Yeah.
So that you're working methodically through that whole territory, whether it's an industry or a geo territory, and not missing any key accounts.
Yeah.
So otherwise, they just flail around. They're just like scattered. They're just wasting. And it is possible there are still people who can prospect and close and do it in some consistent way, but I don't know if it's 1 out of 10, 1 out of 20. You can't build a team around them. But you can build a team around a great process in a way that you've designed the roles to work together really well. And makes the team really scalable. And one of the other best parts is now you have a farm team system where you can bring in junior people and grow them through the ranks. So your attrition goes way down. Your ramp time goes way faster. And the last thing is you have a lot more insight into what's working in the team and not, because you have one salesperson doing everything. If they're not meeting their number, it's really hard to figure out what's going wrong. But when you can look at the prospecting on its own and the closing on its own and the success on its own and the leads on their own, you can very easily spot what's working and what's not in there, because you're sort of breaking apart all these little operational pieces. You don't have a hairball anymore.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of reasons why this works. And if you don't, the bottom line is if you don't do it, you're going to struggle.
And what was the mistake that you said CEOs make, or that you wanted to talk about the CEOs make?
Yep. Before we do that, the one exception to the specialization rule is if you're selling to single consumers or sales cycles are so fast, like one or two calls. So there's always exceptions to every rule.
Of course.
Okay, so let's go to CEOs. If it's like a founder, early stage company, the biggest mistake is there's two of them, not being hands-on with sales cycles and sales, not getting that hands-on feel for what do my customers actually want? What are they buying? How are they buying? Again, too fast. There's like an engineer. It's like, oh, I don't want to sell. Yuck. Well, you need to be hands-on with, maybe even 5 or 10 or 20 sales cycles to really know how to sell, to know if you're going to hire someone, if you haven't sold and you haven't sold before or hired salespeople before, how are you going to hire someone who's going to be effective? You're not going to know unless you've done something yourself. That's one. And the other is hiring a senior salesperson too soon. So the scenario where, again, one entrepreneur who's doing all the selling, okay, I'm done. I'm going to hire a salesperson, take this load off. No, don't do that. That's the high risk way. Everyone's had that fail. Hire a junior person first.
Train them.
Right? Train them. They do your appointment setting, other stuff that is the lower value for you. You get something working. And now you're in a much better position to make a sales hire, whether you promote that junior person or hire from the outside, because you've got something working. That's a lot less risky. So you take smaller steps to get your sales team built. People trying to jump too fast or move too fast the first time is another common mistake.
So you just gave an example of CEOs that are in the startup phase and the smaller business organizations. Go up a level or two. Let's just say a couple hundred employees or even a couple thousand employees. Are there any particular mistakes the CEOs make when they get into that size of the company, that level? Yeah,
and at this point, it may or may not be the CEO dealing with it, but let's just say a senior executive, revenue executive. So again, usually the metrics they don't have the right metrics to really understand which parts are working, which ones aren't. For example, so the inbound funnel metrics can be mixed with the outbound funnel metrics. If they have inbound SDRs and outbound SDRs, they may not be tracking the amount of actual qualified pipeline. So maybe they're really focused on the number of leads being created. Maybe they're focused on the number of demos being held, but they might be missing what's the actual amount of qualified pipeline being created, which is really that pivotal number,
right?
Which is what sales and marketing should care about. Like that's the handoff. And not having the sales teams specialize into the right kinds of roles. It's sort of like having the right people and the right seats on the bus. Maybe they don't have it. Maybe they haven't created those SDRs yet. Maybe they have some, like an inside sales team. This is kind of an extreme example, but in places like Oracle and IBM, they have really big inside sales team, telemarketing, SDR type teams. But for the divisions, when you talk to like a division leader, they're like, yeah, they don't help us. They're not helpful.
Exactly.
Whatever they're doing is just kind of disconnected, right? So there's not that alignment between we have these inside people and we have these field people, and they're just disconnected. The problems do change as you get bigger. There's never any shortage of problems. And a lot of it really ties down to, do you have the right definition of which roles should you have, like the right people in the right roles and the metrics that are clearly set up by role. Because this is still relatively new, this whole idea of sales specialization. It's still the exception. There's probably a bunch of listeners, oh yeah, I read that years ago, we're doing that. Well, you're the exception. Most companies don't do this, or they don't take it as far as they should do it, like combining those, prospectors, SDRs who do prospecting and responding to inbound leads. Big no-no.
It's funny. again, in the large organizations, and you can take an Oracle as an example, that size of a company that I'm referring to. And even in the mid-size organizations, generally you'll have a vice president, maybe you might have a manager or two, and then a few teams, right? So that could be a mid-size organization. I think one of the biggest problems that I've seen, both in my career as well as when, last year alone, I did over 200 executive meetings. And one of the biggest problems that I see, and this is actually in one of my keynotes that I give, and that is your title says something sales, sell something, right? So if you look at VP of sales, senior vice president of sales, executive vice president of sales, global vice president of worldwide sales, I don't care what it is, it has sales inside there. So freaking go find a lead and go sell something. And here's what one of the biggest frustrations that I have with sales leaders is, I don't care how large of an organization that you get. If you personally, on a month-over-month basis, this is my personal thing, if you on a month-over-month basis, if you have not sat in the field or in a chair and followed the process that your team or your organization has outlined for your sales reps to be able to do this, do that, do this, do this, do that, do this, to be able to be successful and know whether or not it's actually going to produce success, then you failed the organization. If you have not prospected, if you're not brought in a single lead, just one a month, then you have failed as an organization, as a leader. And it was funny today, one of our very, very, very large customers, our training customers, a sales rep was having a problem. And so I saw some emails fly back and forth amongst our team, and we're not a massively large organization. And rather than sit there and watch all the emails back and forth, I just simply picked up the phone and I called the mobile phone of the sales rep. And I said, "Hey, John, this is Mario Martinez, CEO of Ingresso." And he was like, "Oh, wait, Mario Martinez is CEO?" And I'm like, "Yeah." He was like, "Holy crap. Like, okay, yeah, what can I do for you?" The idea behind that was I wanted to know what's broken, because that's important to me, is the delivery, the process, the methodology, the platform. And at the end, he was like, "Well, man, thanks for calling me." I'm like, "I totally get what's wrong. I know exactly where it's at. We'll go fix that." Right? That's like being involved in the field and really understanding the customer or the sales cycle or the buying cycle, whatever it might be. And I think that's a huge mistake that sales leaders make as you get higher into different positions and you get larger as an organization.
Yeah, I totally buy it. I think it's that disconnect between if you don't have your hands in the role, you don't really know what the salespeople are dealing with. And so it's really easy to make sort of theoretical changes and plans around whether it's like technology tools and process changes that sound good on paper, but they end up being really frustrating or bad implementation, or it just doesn't translate to the field the way they do from the whiteboard. Looks good on paper, how does it translate to that day-to-day sales job, and you lose that connection.
Yeah.
So well, I agree. It makes a lot of sense.
Well, and sometimes what you see, Aaron, is sales leaders, like they'll do these prospecting days, right? Like bigger the organization, the more commercial, mid-market, and small biz segments, you've got whatever, 50, 100, 1,000 people across an organization that are pounding away on the phones. And the sales leaders are sitting back, okay, what's your number? How many appointments? Okay, check. Okay, check. But no. What I want you to do, sales manager, director, vice president, senior vice president, executive vice president, president of sales, you better freaking sit your butt down into a chair and you make the call and compete against your salespeople. Because if you're asking them to make cold calls, as an example, and people are telling you, "Hey, I can't get through," you need to know, can they not get through? Is it because of our script? Is it because of what we're saying? Is it because we didn't have good training? Is it because cold calling sucks? I don't know what the answer is, but you need to be there. And I think that's a big mistake that we as sales leaders need to be reminded that our title says something sales, sell something. That's my story, and I'm sticking.
Amen. Amen.
So Aaron, you mentioned earlier about this whole inbound, outbound being separate and the reason for them to be separate. And I want to understand that. But before we do that, we're going to listen to this short message from our program sponsor. If you're creating video for social media, you know how important it is to have captions on all of your videos. Really, think of how many times you've passed over a video on social because your phone was muted, or you were in a public place, or at work. Unfortunately, adding a caption to videos has been a pain in the butt or an expensive task to outsource. That is exactly why we use here at Vingresso Subtitle, a new online tool that automatically adds captions to any video in minutes. Subtitle auto-detects the spoken word in your video and burns in open captions that are timed perfectly. Their easy editing interface even helps you clean up the text and customize the captions so they fit your branding. Visit Zubtitle, that's ZUBTITLE.com/Vengresso today to get started. And now back to the podcast. All right. So Aaron, I was talking earlier and you had mentioned something about inbound, outbound, and the whole concept of it being separate and the need to be separate. Can you touch a little bit on that part, please?
So first of all, the biggest improvement, maybe even more than having a CRM, but you sort of do need one to have inbound, all these new practices and specialization. The biggest simple improvement to sales teams is when they put in these inbound SDR team and outbound SDR team, right? Let's assume you have inbound leads, because I know a lot of people don't. Like, I don't have any inbound leads. If you do, forever there's been the marketing team complaining, hey, we generate leads for the sales team. They don't follow up. They don't like them. They complain about them. And the sales team is saying marketing generates leads and they all suck and blah, blah, blah. Well, having an inbound SDR team really bridges that gap where their job is to take all the leads that come in through the website, an 800 number or wherever, review them, call them, pre-qualify, only pass the good ones to sales. And you need that team for most companies in order to bridge that gap. So both sides are happy, right? Marketing gets their follow-up on the leads, sales only gets the best ones passed over. Now that job really requires someone to be there and to be watching for the new leads. And the response time should be within, minutes to hours to 24 hours. It's like a fast response time. There could be small leads, big leads, there could be junk leads. You're like reviewing and deduping, and right? So that's that kind of job. The outbound prospecting job, the outbound SDR job, where their job is to generate new incremental business, whether it's new logos, new companies, it could be extra divisions of current customers that aren't really close. Their job is to say, hey, what are our targets? Let's go talk to them, get appointments. And the good appointments, pass them to the salespeople. That cycle, that rhythm it probably takes on average 2 to 4 weeks to get good appointments. So we're talking like kind of B2B, mid-market B2B SaaS, not, high volume, super high volume, small business. It takes 2 to 4 weeks to get a good qualified appointment on the books and accepted. And the mentality is proactive. The way the day is structured, the way the week is structured, the metrics are all different. So inbound and outbound are like two completely, they're both music, but completely different. So if outbound is slow jazz and inbound is like Britney Spears fast pop, they just don't mix.
Yeah.
And what I've seen when you try to mix them, it's like, I got to respond right now versus I'm like slowly developing a bunch of these key accounts and the comp doesn't mix. And if you use Salesforce.com, you got to use different areas because the inbound lead should be in the leads tab. Outbound prospecting should be done through the accounts and contacts tab, right? Yeah. I hope your people listening to that. So on the surface, they look very similar because you're sending emails, you're making calls, you're generating appointments, and things are getting passed and qualified. But again, completely different mentality and rhythm of the day and the way and process. So they are different. The only time you kind of mix them is if someone is doing like 95% or 90% of one job and the other is so small. It's like, even then there's problems. Like if I'm doing 95% outbound and I get one lead, there's always edge cases, but you really got to keep them separate if you want them to be both high functioning. If you want outbound to be high functioning, people need to be dedicated 100% to that. Anytime you kind of like have someone doing half outbound and this and half some at that, they're not that great at it. They can't be that great at it. They don't have enough time, focus, and dedication to be great at outbound when they're doing it part-time.
That's a really great answer. And so would you say then that inbound should be reporting into marketing and outbound reporting into sales, or does it matter as long as the two organizations or groups are separate?
Most companies, when they're starting out and sort of developing these teams, you really should put the SDRs, whether they're inbound or outbound, under the leader that cares the most about them. Sometimes that's the marketing leader. Sometimes that's the sales leader. So over time, the SDRs generally end up in sales because it's a sales career path role. Not always, but generally they do. Because you have this farm team system. The most junior people start in the inbound SDR role. They get promoted to outbound prospecting, get promoted to small business inside sales, get promoted to mid-market, enterprise, and so on. It's part of that sales career path.
All right. That's a fair answer. And I love the way you presented it, which is basically whoever cares most about the role and the function and the revenue, right?
Yeah. Just to get it off the ground till it's, working and get your systems down and the team's reliable. And then sometimes they change ownership.
Yeah. I think you talked a little bit about this before. I've heard you talk about this, and who should not create an SDR team. I think you've got some feelings and perspective on that. Share with me what your thoughts are on that.
Who shouldn't create an SDR team, or who shouldn't do outbound prospecting? Kind of two different things. So I think, again, in places where you have, for example, really fast sales cycles, you're doing 1 or 2 or 3 call closes, they're within a week or 2 weeks or under 30 days, then you probably are not going to, your salespeople are going to do whatever their lead, whether it's inbound, outbound, and closing all together. And you're not going to have SDRs. Places where outbound doesn't make sense, whether you have SDRs or not. For example, if you have really small deal sizes, your customers generally are under, the lifetime value is under $10,000. Financially, usually doesn't make sense to do outbound just because you can't get enough customers through your funnel to justify it. And always exceptions, but so small deal sizes usually doesn't make sense. If you're in a really tough niche, like custom services, where it's hard to explain what you do, it's hard to find targets, or it's hyper competitive in the VAR market or in the hosting market, where there's just a million options and there's really not much differentiation, can be reasons why outbound wouldn't make sense. Or, so the way I think about outbound, like probably anything else, on a scale of 1 to 10, some companies can be a 10 out of 10 and making money at it, right? Acme was an old client and they just generated crazy amounts of revenue through outbound. Some companies might be a 1 out of 10 in terms of the challenge. Like, it could just be really hard. Maybe you could make some money, but it'd be so hard, it just isn't worth it. The last book we did, that's From Impossible to Inevitable, we sort of went through and listed red flags on like why you might be cautious about outbound. But most companies, everyone who is in a software company, all software companies and B2B companies that have deal sizes of, customers of more than $10,000 to $20,000 should at some point have outbound. And even for companies that aren't B2B, like, it's interesting, even for smaller deal sizes, you can still use outbound, but more on the partner track, to find partners that are going to be a good fit to you. It's really the same principle. Like, who's an ideal partner? How do you build the list? How do you go reach out to them? How do you sell them? So there's a lot of ways outbound can be used, but I think we want to be smart about it. And like anything else, it probably takes 6 months on average. Whenever you're creating a new sales role, it's probably 6 months on average to define it and roll it out and get the kinks worked out. Whether that's like a customer success management role, inbound is probably the simplest one, but outbound prospecting, a new kind of sales role. But it could be as long as a year in outbound, depending on if you're in a challenging niche. The actual strategy is, I think it's like 4 to 12 months if you're starting from scratch to get an outbound team up and running, or outsourcing program up and running, and generating consistent qualified pipeline in a way that you feel like, okay, this is working and we're going to see revenue from this in a way that feels predictable.
Yeah. For those of you that are hearing potentially a dog barking in the background or kids, my man Aaron, he's got a tribe in his house.
Yeah.
And that tribe is 9 kids and how many dogs?
This is 4.
4 dogs.
4 dogs. Yeah.
Tell me you've got cats or parrots or something else.
Oh my God. Help me. Obviously, we wouldn't do it if we didn't love everything about it. But yeah. There's a lot of pee and poo to clean up.
Yeah, exactly.
Getting less so. All the the youngest baby is 2 now. So, people are potty trained. It's most of the dogs at this point, which I've kind of given up hope on.
So let me ask you a question. Are you going for a 10th?
Actually, we are. I know, because we might as well have an even number 10. We're looking to adopt a baby boy, so we're in the early stages of that now. Because why not?
So
and we're moving to Scotland this year because why not?
What I need to know though is, and again, for those listening in, this is actually part of your brand. Actually, a dad of 9, I think, is how you brand yourself in various different places. But help me understand, what kind of car do you drive to fit a tribe of 10 kids and 2 adults?
I'm sure you've seen the FedEx vans, right?
Yeah, of course.
We have a Mercedes Sprinter, that 12-person passenger van. It's basically like the extended FedEx van, but all black.
I don't know if I see them
It's
that
awesome.
often. What is it?
Yeah, it's awesome.
It's awesome.
It's the Mercedes Sprinter. Yeah, it's awesome. Yeah, I love driving it because you can stand up. It's just so much space.
Now, is that the only car on the market that would support a family of 12?
There's a lot of basically those big passenger cargo vans that you can get 12 or 15 seats in there.
There you go.
But it's great. And we do have a handicap sticker. Parking's not as hard as we thought because we adopted a boy from China a few years ago who has arthrogryposis. So we never really have as much of a problem as you'd think parking it.
Fair enough.
And easy to drive. Anyway, yeah, it's an awesome car. I'll miss it when we move.
So do me a favor, Aaron, you've given some great ideas around growth and sales development and, mistakes that sales leaders make. If people want to get a hold of you, what's the best way? Should they connect with you on LinkedIn? Should they email you?
So predictablerevenue.com, or I'll give my email as well, but the best site is predictablerevenue.com. And on LinkedIn, I think you have to use my email if you want to send a connection, which you're welcome to. It's AIR, A-I-R, at predictablerevenue.com.
All right. Well, we'll make sure we'll put that into the show notes. And for those of you that are sending, obviously, a connection request to Aaron, you need to send a personalized connection request that says you heard him on Selling with Social and connect up. Also, Aaron, you could turn around and you could actually have people follow you on LinkedIn. So if he's got tens of thousands of followers, so make sure that you follow him on LinkedIn or on Twitter. Yeah. I'm sure you're on Twitter as well. And also don't forget, we'll put into the show notes the link to his latest book. And Aaron, where can we get a link so that we could post into the show notes for the book? And what's the latest book you want them to go take a look at?
Yeah, fromimpossible.com.
Fromimpossible.com. There.
Yeah.
So I got one final question for you, my friend, and that is your all-time favorite movie. What is it?
All-time favorite movie is Memento.
Memento.
Right. That's 20 years ago. It's a movie that kind of runs backwards, like a thriller. It was a guy who doesn't have short-term memory, or he only has short-term memory. So it's just a really creative way this crazy way they shot the movie that works. It's like a movie that runs backwards, in slices, so you don't know. It's like they call it like a mind bender or a thriller. They put the pieces together, then oh, how the hell did that happen? Psychological thriller or mind bender.
There you go.
Memento.
The first time it's been on in 100 plus episodes of Selling with Social. So we'll take Memento.
Yeah. Actually, it's funny. I just realized one of the actresses, Carrie Ann Moss, I forgot she's in that. She's helping my wife put on a play in Edinburgh this year. Funny enough. Small world.
That's a picture shot.
Trinity from The Matrix. Yeah.
I love it. Fantastic. Well, Aaron, thanks for joining us. And for all you listening in right now to Selling with Social, make sure you pick up his latest book. And also, when you connect up with him, make sure you personalize that connection request. Don't turn off the dial now. Take a listen to this additional message. Hey, thanks for listening to the Selling with Social Sales Podcast. Did you enjoy that show? If so, would you do me a huge favor and give the Selling with Social podcast a rating and review on iTunes? That would be super awesome. Also, if you want to easily find our show, just go to vengreso.com. That's VENGRESO.com and click on podcast. From there, you'll find the Selling with Social podcast. Thanks for listening in. And until the next show, be awesome. Mario Martinez Jr. out. If you ever wondered how we at Vengreso get those really cool captions to any video on social media, well, wonder no more. Use Subtitle so your videos stand out by visiting subtitle.com/Vengreso. You could also see it in the show notes of this podcast.